chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. We'll just look at that place where we read. Luke 10 from verse 25. Luke chapter 10. That is the story of the Good Samaritan. The story of the Good Samaritan. So Luke chapter 10 from verse 25. So it says, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You've answered rightly. Do this, and you will live. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? Then Jesus answered and said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, took care of him, and on the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, Take care of him, and whatsoever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among thieves? And he said, He who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. So, the discussion we have this last weekend was a very beautiful one. And we said that love for God forms a triangle, right? Love for God forms a triangle. God is on top of that triangle. And then you and your neighbor are at the base of that triangle. So God is on top, and then here is you, and then here is your neighbor. So that is a triangle like that. Okay? And you are supposed to love God. You love God. But that love you have for God has to be proven or expressed by your love for your neighbor. You love God, but love for God has to be proven by your love for your neighbor. Without love for neighbor, love for God is absent. Love for God cannot be proven. So that's the conversation we're having last Sunday. So we began by saying that someone asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in the law? What's the greatest commandment in the law? Which one is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus said that the greatest commandment in the law was to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Love God. The essence of life is to love God. And that's something that we need to have at the back of our mind. That the essence of life is to love God. The essence of God is not to do business. It's not to travel around. It's not to make money. The essence of life is what? To love God. That is what life is about. You know, God is the essence of our lives. The Bible says in him we live, in him we move, and in him we do what? We have our being. In him we live, in him we move, in him we have our being. God is the summation. Without God, life is meaningless. I want you to always remember that. Without God, life is empty. Life is meaningless. Money is meaningless. Marriage is meaningless. Wealth is meaningless. The thing that you have to have in place before anything can make sense is God. So God is the basics of life. That's what we have to make sure that we have in place. And then to love him, to serve him, to worship him with all our heart is the essence of life. Okay? That's the purpose of life, to love God. And then we said that love for God is demonstrated by obedience to his word. You don't just say, I love you, Lord, with mouth. The way you express love for another human being is not the same way you express love for God. This is love for God, that you obey his commandments. Obeying his commandments is how you show love for God. And this is very important. We need to distinguish how you love people from how you love God. We often try to attach the sentiments we have for people, the emotion we have for people, the expressions we have for people, the tears we cry and all of that. That's not love for God. Love for God is that you obey his commandment. It's not that you feel anything, feel something or not, obey his commandment. If you obey his commandment, that's when you are expressing that you really love God. We should love God intellectually. We should love God decisively. We should love God emotionally. We should love God in our thinking. We should love God in our will. We should love God in our emotion. We should serve God with our strength. We should go about the assignment of obeying God with everything in us. So that's the first thing that Jesus established. Okay? You love God with all your heart. That's the greatest commandment. Now, like we said on Sunday, this man said to Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus says to love the Lord with your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And before this man will run off, because the man has an intention for saying, what is the greatest commandment in the law? So Jesus now said, there's a second one. Okay? The second is like unto it, thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself. So this man wanted it to be that there is one command. But Jesus said, no, it is not one command. It is two commands that is one. Right? It's not one command. What is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus said, it is not one command. It is two commands that is one. Why? Because this man, religious people, want it to be that they just love God. They want love for God to stand alone. Religious people want love for God to stand alone. They want dedication to God to just be between them and God, right? My relationship with God is between me and God. God knows the heart. God searches the heart. It's God who knows whether I'm a righteous person or not. We just want it to be between us and God. And Jesus said, no, it can't just be between you and God. It has to be that if you say you love God with all your heart, you need to reach out and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that's where the challenge is. Anyone can claim to love God. You can claim to love God. Nobody sees God. To ask him, Father, does this person love you? No, nobody sees God to ask him. So we cannot claim that. We cannot claim to be holy. We cannot claim to be righteous. We cannot claim to be, dedicated to God. Anybody can claim that. It's easy to claim. It's easy to speak in tongues. Right? How many of you know it's easy to speak in tongues? Who knows? It's easy. It's the easiest thing to speak in tongues. Just speak something you don't know. Speak something you don't know. And no one can prove that it is wrong. Just open your mouth, speak something. Somebody said that if you go to any place, you can actually, if you don't know their language, you don't need to know the language to communicate when you are, if you go to a community, you don't need to know their language, but if you know what it sounds like, you can speak, you can, how do I say it now? When somebody is angry, if you're angry in any language, if you talk out of anger in any language, you'll be talking nonsense. How many of you know that? If you're angry, even if you're from Abreba and you are angry, if you're speaking Abreba, you'll be speaking nonsense. Because your word will not be coming out very well, right? If you're speaking Igbo, it's nonsense. If you're speaking English, I want to take just. So if you want to, you can pretend like you know any language. So just know what that language sounds like, and then be repeating that kind of sound like when you're angry. People will think that you know that language, but you're very, very angry, so you can't understand him. So if you want to speak in tongues, just speak something that nobody understands. You have passed. Only Chineke can know the one that's correct. So nobody should say they love God, because it can't be proven. And Jesus said it should be proven. Your love for God should be proven. Your spirituality should be proven. Your dedication to God should be proven. It should have proof. And what's the proof? The proof is that you have to love people. You have to love people. And it's very, very interesting how God wants us to prove love for him. Ordinarily, what we will say, how do we say you can prove love for God? We want to come up with all kinds of spiritual things. You have to be able to speak in tongues. You have to be able to quote the Bible. You have to be able to fast. Some of us who are here, you have not fasted at all for the past 1 year, right? You can't remember the day you didn't eat food. I think fasting has its use. Fasting is useful. I try to fast every week. Fasting has its value. But that's not to prove that you love God. Praying does not prove that you love God. Jesus said, what proves you love God is that you love your neighbor, classmate, wife, husband, co-tenant, fellow street, resident. Just love people. And we should do that. And loving people is not easy, right? Is it easy to love people? People are hard to love. People are terrible to love. People are challenging to love. That's why even husbands and wives, they marry after a while, have their joy, because they know the reality of who they are. They know the wife now knows the husband now knows the wife, and all the magic is gone out of the relationship. There's no spark anymore, because I know you. The singles who are not yet committed like that, they are jumping around each other. I love you, you love me. Just give them 2 years. They marry, and 2 years they are quiet, they are calm. They are angry at each other. People are difficult to love. So this morning I said that you are not, what did I say? You're not Commanded to like somebody. What did I say? You're not commanded to like anybody. Right? You're commanded to love. God is smart. In fact, somebody asked me a question. He said, how can I love somebody who I don't like? You know? Is that hard? How can I like someone who I don't love? How can I love somebody who I don't like? You know? You see, let me give you the answer. Can I give you the answer? It's a very simple answer. You see, likeness is not a choice. Love is a choice. You cannot like somebody by choice. No. You like somebody by accident. You like somebody by mood. You like somebody by emotion. Are you guys understanding me? You just like you like somebody by what now? By infatuation. You don't like by choice. You like by accident. Write it down. You don't like by choice. You like by accident. Let me tell you what it means. What it means is that when you see somebody come, how many of you have seen somebody very beautiful? You've seen somebody beautiful before? Okay. As soon as you see them, something in you likes them. Right? You didn't make any choice. That is something is external, right? Something on the outside just overwhelms you and you just like the person. That's what likeness is about. Okay. You can just see somebody and they behave well. That behavior, the thing you like, okay, watch this now. The thing you like or the person you like draws the likeness from you. Draws the likeness out from you. You get it? The person you like is not you liking. It's not you doing something to them. It is them doing something to you. Does that make sense? You see them and something about them forces you to like them. It's not your choice. You can also see somebody and nothing about them forces you to like them. Have you seen somebody before and you just say, just saw them? Game most. Have you seen somebody, you know how we used to do in the church where we used to use bench to sit down, right? You sit on the bench, that bench should contain up to 8 persons and only 4 of you are there at the moment. And somebody just comes, you see their face and space comes out on the bench. Just see their face, there's space. Somebody else come, you see their face, space disappears on the bench. Because something about them is making you not. God is smart. We are natural beings. This is very important. This is so important because that is what we call love. We think that natural thing is love. It's not. That is nature. You can see someone and not like them. But just because you don't like them does not mean you don't love them. I love you even if I don't like you. And let me guarantee you something. Even in marriage, there are times you look at your husband or wife and you don't like them. Raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. I'm sure someone looked at their husband this morning and you didn't like them. The problem is that we think that when I don't like you, it means I don't love you. It means that at that moment, we are not agreeable. Does that make sense? We're not agreeable. Something about you is not allowing us to connect. That's like. But regardless of like or not, I have to love you. Why? Love is a choice. As long as you can choose, you can love. It's not, you don't fall into love. You choose to love. Don't worry. If you don't like somebody, don't worry. You mustn't like them. But you must love them. I've set you free, right? I'm sure everybody here has somebody they don't like. Yeah, you can afford not to like them, but you must love them. That means you must treat them well. In that public yard where you live, you may have a woman that is in that yard that you don't like. She talks too much. She makes too much noise, right? She used to, just be wicked. I don't know what's wrong with her. You can afford not to like her, but you can't afford not to love her. Why? Love is a command. Like is an accident. Like is how I felt. So you should love people. It's tough. It's hard. It's hard when you think that you have to like someone to love them. If you think you have to like to love, it's difficult. But if you know you are sent to love people, then it's actually very, very easy. You don't need to see people to love them. You don't need to see people to love them. You can love them before you saw them. Okay? Very important. But it's difficult for us. Some people have dealt with us very terribly and we don't want to love them. Jesus says, no, love for God is reflected in love for your neighbor. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Okay? So this next man we read about says, all right, so I should love my neighbor. And this is, neighbor means everybody, right? Neighbor means everybody. And how can I just love everybody? Have you seen people argue that they can't love everybody before? They argue. No, you can't love everybody. Well, Jesus says love everybody. If Jesus says to love everybody, then it means that it is possible to do so. But this man says, I can't love everybody. It's too much. There are about 7-point-something billion people in the world. I can't love everybody. I can't love everybody in my village. I can't love everybody in my church. I can't love everybody. Jesus said, you can. So the man says, okay, I'm ready to love my neighbor, but who is my neighbor? Who qualifies to be my neighbor? That question is an arrogant question. That question is a foolish question, really. It's a question that is asked from pride, from pomposity. Who is my neighbor? Pride and pomposity. Why? I'll answer that. But some of us make a list in our mind of people that we cannot love, right? We have a list. Just because someone has offended you does not mean you should hate them. You have no right to hate them. Just because someone is actually your enemy and looking for a way to kill you, you have no right to hate them. In fact, Jesus says that when people hate you and despitefully use you, you should rejoice. Right? You should actually rejoice. In fact, he says, be exceeding glad.